What if I told you that a blind woman from a small village in Bulgaria may have foreseen exactly what's happening to Donald Trump and to America right now? What if the same woman also predicted that the year 2026 would mark a terrifying turning point for the entire world? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't folklore or fantasy. It's something far stranger, and it might just change how you see the future. Her name was Baba Vanga, and in Eastern Europe she's known as the Nostradamus of the Balkans. Born in 1911 in what was then the Ottoman Empire, her childhood was unremarkable until a violent dust storm struck when she was only 12. The storm nearly took her life, and it did take her sight. But according to everyone who knew her, when Vanga re-emerged from that storm, she didn't just lose her vision. She gained something extraordinary. She could see the future. Over the following decades, countless witnesses claimed her prophecies came true with eerie accuracy. She spoke of world events long before they happened. Disasters, political shifts, even technological revolutions that hadn't yet been imagined. People from every corner of the globe traveled to her modest home, desperate to hear what the blind mystic would say about their lives, their countries, and their destiny. And among those visions, one prediction stands out: the rise, fall, and astonishing return of a golden-towered leader in America. A man from wealth and fame, scorned by elites, yet adored by millions. A man whose battles would tear the nation apart, and whose fate would shape the world's direction. She didn't name him, but the clues are impossible to ignore. Baba Vanga warned that a time would come when America itself would be shaken from within, that the leader she saw would face relentless trials, humiliation, and betrayal, yet somehow emerge stronger than before. According to her, that turning point would arrive in the mid-2020s, and as we edge closer to 2026, the pieces seem to be falling exactly where she said they would. But who exactly was this mysterious woman? How could a blind villager with no formal education predict events decades before they happened, down to the year? And what did she truly say about the United States, its leaders, and the world that's coming next? Stay right here, because once you understand who Baba Vanga really was, her story will send chills through your spine and make you wonder whether the future has already been written. Before we can understand her warnings about Trump in 2026, we need to understand who Baba Vanga truly was. She wasn't a sideshow fortune teller tossing vague guesses into the air. She was something entirely different. A woman whose predictions were recorded, verified, and feared by people in power. After she lost her sight, Vanga began having visions that she couldn't explain. She would speak names of people she had never met, describe future events with precise details, and warn of disasters that hadn't yet happened. Her neighbors thought she was cursed, until her predictions started coming true. By the 1940s, even government officials were quietly visiting her for guidance. Over the years, thousands came. Scientists, world leaders, and ordinary people who wanted to know their fate. They brought tape recorders, notebooks, translators, anything to preserve her words. What they found was beyond coincidence. She described the September 11th attacks decades before they happened, speaking of iron birds striking America. She foresaw the 2004 tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands, warning of a wave that would swallow entire nations. She predicted the rise of ISIS, calling it a great shadow born from the sands, and the election of America's first African-American president, Barack Obama. Long before it was imaginable, even the skeptics couldn't ignore the accuracy. How could a blind woman from a remote village know so much? How could her predictions line up so precisely with events no one could have anticipated? Some said it was divine vision. Others called it coincidence. But either way, Baba Vanga's prophecies were being fulfilled one after another, and that made people start listening very carefully. Her fame grew so much that researchers from across Europe came to study her. The Bulgarian government even recorded some of her sessions officially, archiving what she said for historical analysis. And while many of her predictions were hopeful, others were dark, especially those involving the United States. She warned of a time when America would face its greatest test, not from an outside enemy, but from within. She spoke of division, of people turning against each other, of anger rising from the heart of the nation. And at the center of that storm she saw one man, a man of gold, surrounded by towers and power, whose destiny was intertwined with America's downfall or rebirth. Decades ago, it sounded impossible. But today, as the world watches events surrounding Donald Trump unfold, those words feel less like legend and more like a warning we can't afford to ignore. And if you think what you've heard so far is chilling, wait until you hear what she said about the golden leader himself, because every part of her vision seems to be happening in real time. Now let's talk about the prophecy that has everyone paying attention. Baba Vanga spoke of a man who would rise to power in America, a man unlike any leader before him. She said he would not come from the world of politics, but from the world of gold and wealth. He would be loud, controversial, and relentless. He would be adored by millions and despised by millions more. And despite the world saying he would fail, he would seize the highest office in the land. Sound familiar? In 2016, when every poll, pundit, and expert said Donald Trump had no chance, he defied every expectation. The world watched as a billionaire businessman, surrounded by his golden towers and television fame, became the most powerful man on earth. And if Baba Vanga truly saw this decades before it happened, that means what she saw next should make us pay attention. She predicted that this leader would face endless persecution, that those in power would try to silence him, discredit him, and destroy his legacy. She foresaw legal battles, accusations, and chaos swirling around him like a storm that never ends. But she also said something else, that he would survive it all. Every piece of that vision is playing out in front of us. The impeachments, the investigations, the endless trials, the global media frenzy. And yet, through it all, Trump continues to dominate the conversation, stronger than before, just as Vanga said he would. But here's where her prophecy takes a chilling turn. Baba Vanga claimed that after a time of humiliation and exile, this same leader would return. She spoke of a comeback that would shock the world. According to her timeline, this return would begin around 2025, setting the stage for events that would forever alter America and the world by 2026. Look around. Trump has announced his campaign. He's fighting through every obstacle thrown at him. His supporters are more energized than ever. And as the 2024 election looms, the timing aligns almost perfectly with Baba Vanga's vision. But her prophecy doesn't end with victory. She warned that his return would mark the beginning of great upheaval, a time when the United States would be split in ways it hadn't seen since its founding. She described the great fracturing, when trust in institutions would crumble and the people would be forced to choose sides. What did she mean by that? What did she truly see happening to America after his return to power? Because if her timeline is right, the year 2026 isn't just another election cycle, it's a countdown. Stay with me, because what Baba Vanga said about 2026 will shake you to your core. According to Baba Vanga, the real storm begins not with Trump's rise, but with what follows. She foresaw a time when America, the most powerful nation in the world, would be shaken from its foundations. A time when its people would stop seeing each other as neighbors and start seeing each other as enemies. A time when the very idea of united would come into question. That time, she said, would begin in 2026. Vanga spoke of an era when trust in leadership would collapse, when protests would fill the streets, and when the country would seem to stand on the edge of civil breakdown. She described a house divided, a nation where families and friends would no longer speak the same language, not literally, but in belief, loyalty, and truth. She said this division would be so deep that even the government itself would begin to fracture. She called it the Great Fracturing. In her visions, states began challenging the federal system, laws were ignored, local leaders claimed power for themselves. And amid the chaos, a single event, a spark, would ignite a wave of unrest that no one could control. She said the nation's capital would become a symbol of that division, surrounded by angry crowds demanding change. Sound far-fetched? Look around. Political polarization has reached historic levels. Protests and social movements dominate headlines. People are losing faith in elections, in justice, in institutions that once seemed unshakable. It's as if every piece of the foundation is beginning to crack, just as she said it would. Baba Vanga also warned that this chaos wouldn't remain confined to politics. It would seep into every corner of society, into the economy, technology, even nature itself. She said 2026 would not be remembered as just a political turning point, but as the year when humanity would begin to face the full consequences of its own choices. And here's where it gets darker. She claimed that as this division deepens, America's influence around the world would begin to fade. Nations that were once allies would start forming new partnerships, reshaping the balance of global power. Economies would tremble, currencies would lose strength, and the world would begin looking elsewhere for leadership. It's a prophecy that feels impossible to ignore. The fractures are already showing. The debt crisis, the loss of global trust, the shifting alliances, every indicator points toward instability. But Baba Vanga's predictions for 2026 didn't stop at politics or economy. She said nature itself would rebel, that the earth would deliver its own warnings. And those warnings, she said, would come in the form of fire, storms, and shaking ground. Baba Vanga didn't only warn about division in politics, she spoke of the earth itself rising in revolt. According to her, the year 2026 would not only test humanity's unity, but its very survival. She said nature would speak loudly, delivering messages that humanity could no longer ignore. Storms, quakes, and fire would sweep across nations, shaking people from their illusion of control. In one of her most haunting visions, Vanga described fire falling from the sky and lands trembling where they had never trembled before. At the time, those words sounded poetic or symbolic. But today, with the rise of extreme weather events, massive wildfires, and strange atmospheric phenomena, her warnings feel terrifyingly real. Think about it. We've seen record-breaking hurricanes, droughts that last for years, floods drowning cities that never used to flood, and heat waves turning once livable regions into furnaces. Scientists are calling this the new normal, but Vanga called it the Earth's warning. She said these events would signal that humanity had lost its balance with nature, and that the planet was beginning to correct it. She also mentioned rivers of fire and raging winds that crossed the world. Some believe she foresaw the increase in volcanic activity, the spread of uncontrollable wildfires, and even solar storms, eruptions from the sun powerful enough to disrupt global communications and power grids, with solar activity expected to peak around 2025 to 2026. That prediction doesn't sound far-fetched anymore. Vanga's words painted a picture of a world pushed to its limits, cities brought to darkness, coastlines redrawn by floods, and skies filled with strange lights and smoke. But she also said these weren't punishments, they were warnings, signs meant to wake humanity before it was too late. And yet, despite these natural catastrophes, she said people would still fail to listen. They'd argue over politics, technology, and power, ignoring the message written in the wind and water. Only when disaster struck close to home would the world finally start to understand what she meant by the reckoning of nature. If she was right, the events leading to 2026 aren't random. They're part of a cycle she foresaw long ago. But as unsettling as her environmental predictions are, the next part might be even more alarming, because Vanga also warned about the rise of thinking machines, technology that would begin to make decisions for humanity, and she claimed that 2026 would mark the year when we'd realize we had created something we could no longer fully control. Baba Vanga once warned of a time when the minds of men would merge with the minds of their own creations. She spoke of machines that would not just obey but decide, machines that would think, analyze, and act on their own, shaping human destiny in ways their creators could no longer predict or prevent. She said that by the mid-2020s, this silent revolution would reach a critical point, and according to her prophecies, the first true crisis of control would erupt in 2026. Back when she spoke those words, it sounded like science fiction. Today it sounds like the nightly news. Artificial intelligence now writes books, composes music, predicts diseases, trades stocks, and even guides weapons. Algorithms control the flow of information we see, the prices we pay, and the opinions we form. Every digital action leaves a fingerprint, and those fingerprints are being studied, analyzed, and predicted by machines. Baba Vanga described this future in unsettling terms. She said that humanity would hand over its power to the creations of its own brilliance, and that the moment of realization would come too late, a moment when people would look around and see that decisions shaping their lives were being made by invisible systems no one truly understood. She called it the age of the artificial mind. And the year she mentioned, 2026, wasn't just another milestone. She said it would be the year when humans would confront the truth about what they had created. A global incident, she warned, would reveal the danger of relying too heavily on machines. She didn't specify what that event would be, but her words hinted at something involving information, control, and chaos spreading faster than anyone could contain. Could it be a massive cyber attack? An AI malfunction that manipulates global markets? Or a technology-driven crisis that spirals beyond human intervention? We don't know, but what's undeniable is how eerily her vision mirrors the direction we're heading today. Tech leaders themselves are warning that artificial intelligence could pose an existential threat if left unchecked. The warnings are no longer coming from mystics, they're coming from the inventors themselves. Vanga'S prediction didn't end there. She said that this confrontation between humanity and its own creations would not destroy the world, but transform it. That we'd have to rediscover what makes us human before it was lost completely. And that this realization, painful as it would be, would spark something new, the awakening of global consciousness. But before that awakening, she said, the world would stand on the brink of disaster, because alongside the rise of AI, another danger was unfolding. The escalation of conflicts that could ignite a war the world was not ready to face. Stay with me, because in the next part, we dive into Baba Vanga's most terrifying prophecy of all, the warning of a global confrontation that would bring humanity to the edge of annihilation. Baba Vanga's visions didn't stop at natural disasters or technological dangers. She also saw what she called the shadow that spreads across the world, a conflict unlike any before. Not a single war between two nations, but a chain reaction of smaller battles, political games, and secret alliances that would ignite one by one, until the entire world stood at the edge of something far greater. She said this era of mounting tension would reach its breaking point by the end of 2026. In her words, the eagle and the dragon will glare across the sea, and the bear will stir again. At the time, no one knew what that meant. Today, it sounds like a map of our headlines. The United States and China are locked in rivalry over trade, and Taiwan, the bear, clearly Russia, is waging war in Eastern Europe, and smaller nations, from the Middle East to the Pacific, are being drawn into the gravitational pull of these powers. Vanga warned that this slow burn of conflict would reach a point where diplomacy would crumble, and proxy wars would evolve into direct confrontations. She said alliances would shift rapidly, and old enemies would shake hands while old friends turn away. We're already seeing it. Countries that once relied on America are building new partnerships elsewhere. Global trust is fracturing, and uncertainty is the new normal. Her followers said she often spoke about a time when the world would remember the fear of silence, describing skies cleared of aircraft, cities plunged into darkness, and people watching the horizon in dread. She never used the word nuclear, but many believe that's what she was hinting at, the moment when humanity realizes how close it stands to its own destruction. But Vanga'S prophecy wasn't purely about doom. She said that in the same year as humanity flirts with destruction, a new kind of awakening would begin, a mass realization. That the systems people once trusted were built on deception, that those in control had been keeping truths hidden for generations, and that ordinary citizens would begin to see through the illusion. She called it the Great Unveiling, a period when lies would crumble, secrets would be exposed, and power would shift from the few to the many. According to her timeline, this revelation, this moment of mass awakening, begins in 2026. just as the world trembles on the edge of chaos. The question is, what kind of revelation could be so powerful that it changes the entire course of history? Because in her next and final set of predictions, Baba Vanga spoke of something that could alter humanity's destiny, a moment when truth, technology, and prophecy would collide, forcing the world to choose between destruction and transformation. Baba Vanga said that after the storms, the fires, and the global tension, something extraordinary would happen, something that would divide humanity not by nations or beliefs, but by awareness. She called it the Great Unveiling. According to her visions, 2026 wouldn't just be the year of chaos, it would also mark the beginning of revelation, a time when truths long buried would finally surface. Governments, corporations, even global institutions would be exposed for the secrets they had kept hidden from the public. She said the mask of power will fall, and the people will see what has been shaping their destiny all along. Some interpreters believe she foresaw the rise of whistleblowers, massive leaks, and global networks that can't be silenced or controlled, a time when censorship collapses and hidden information flows freely for the first time. And if you think about the direction we're heading, that's not far off. Decentralized communication, encrypted data, and independent media are already challenging the old order. It's as if the world is preparing for the moment she saw, when truth itself becomes unstoppable. But Vanga also warned that this awakening would come at a cost. She said that as people learn the truth, fear and anger would follow. Institutions would crumble under the weight of their own lies. Systems built on deception would collapse, and humanity would be forced to rebuild from the ground up, not just its economy or politics, but its entire understanding of what it means to be human. She said this would be the hardest test of all, the point where humanity must decide whether to destroy itself or begin again. But she didn't end her prophecy in despair. She ended it with hope. She saw a generation rising from the ashes of the old world, a generation that would remember who they truly are, people who would live differently, think differently, and build a new civilization rooted not in greed or fear, but in truth, unity, and understanding. Her final message was simple, yet haunting. After the darkness there will be light, but only for those who can see it, and maybe that's what all her warnings were about, not fear, but awareness. A wake-up call for a world too distracted to notice the signs all around it. So now the question becomes, if Baba Vanga's prophecies about Trump, division, technology, and global upheaval are unfolding exactly as she foresaw, then what if the rest of it, the awakening, the unveiling, the rebirth, is also real? Because if 2026 truly is the turning point she described, then we are standing on the edge of something that could change everything, forever. So ask yourself this, are these events mere coincidence? Or are we watching prophecy unfold? And more importantly, are you ready for what comes next? And so, as the years draw closer to 2026, the lines between past and future blur. The storms rise, the nations tremble, and the world stands at a threshold it cannot yet see. Baba Vanga's voice still echoes through time, warning not of destruction alone, but of awakening. She said humanity would walk through fire before it learns to see the light, that truth would burn away illusion, and only those who face it without fear would endure what comes next. The Great Division will not last forever. From the ashes of confusion, a new order will be born, not built by governments or kings, but by the awakened, those who remember that light is always born through darkness. She spoke of a time when mankind would reclaim its spirit, when knowledge, long hidden, would return to the hearts of ordinary people, when the blind would see again, not with eyes, but with understanding. And when that moment comes, the world will not end, it will begin anew. So remember her words, watch the signs and prepare, for the prophecy of 2026 has already begun to unfold.